The show got canceled twice before it became one of the longest-running cartoons in television history. Not once, twice. And the second time it was canceled, Fox sold the rights to the reruns for almost nothing because nobody wanted them. A show that would go on to produce over 400 episodes was being given away like it had no value at all. Then the DVDs started selling. Then the late-night reruns started pulling audiences that the show had never been able to find on Fox. Then Fox came back, quietly, and admitted they had made a mistake. That almost never happens in television. But the cancellations are not even the strangest thing that almost ended Family Guy. The strangest thing happened at an airport in Boston on a Tuesday morning in September 2001, when the creator of the show was running 10 minutes late. Welcome back to Red Umbrella. Let's get into it. The two cancellations nobody saw coming. Family Guy almost never existed past the year 2000. Not because the show was bad, not because the people making it gave up, but because a television network made a series of decisions so boneheaded, so completely wrong, that they accidentally buried one of the most popular animated shows in history before it ever had a real chance to breathe. And then, years later, that same network had to crawl back and admit they got it wrong. That almost never happens in television. Networks do not admit mistakes. They move on, they rebrand, they pretend the canceled show never existed. Fox did something different with Family Guy. They canceled it twice and then begged it to come back. The full story of how that happened is one of the strangest in television history, and it starts on a single night in January 1999. The pilot episode of Family Guy aired on January 31st, 1999. Fox put it right after their Super Bowl broadcast, which meant roughly 22 million people watched it. That is an enormous audience for any show, let alone a brand new animated series from a creator most people had never heard of. Seth MacFarlane was 25 years old when the show premiered. He had sold Fox on the idea based on 2 short films he had made in college, and the network gave him money to turn those films into a full series. The pilot landed well enough that Fox ordered more episodes, and Family Guy settled into a Sunday night time slot between The Simpsons and The X-Files. Season 1 pulled in around 12.8 million households and ranked 33rd in the national ratings. For a new show, that was solid ground. Then Fox moved it. Season 2 began in September 1999, and the show was now airing on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. This placed Family Guy directly against Frasier on NBC. During the late 1990s, Thursday night on NBC was the single most competitive block in all of television. Shows like Frasier, ER, and Seinfeld owned that night. Scheduling a cartoon that had been on the air for less than a year against a show that had already won multiple Emmy Awards and had millions of loyal viewers was almost guaranteed to produce one result: bad ratings. That is exactly what happened. Family Guy got demolished in the numbers. Fox responded to the falling ratings not by moving the show to a better time slot, but by moving it to multiple different time slots with almost no notice to viewers. Throughout season 2, the show bounced around the schedule constantly. Fans who wanted to watch it had to hunt for it week to week. The confusion hurt the ratings even further. Fox canceled the show in May 2000 at the end of season 2. Then, less than 2 months later, Fox changed its mind. In July 2000, they ordered 13 more episodes. Season 3 was on. The show returned in November 2001 in a Thursday night slot again, this time at 8 p.m. The competition that season was Friends and Survivor, 2 of the most watched shows on American television at that time. Friends was finishing its legendary run as the most watched comedy in the country. Survivor had launched a reality television revolution the previous year and was drawing enormous audiences. Family Guy, still trying to rebuild its audience, sat directly opposite both of them and bled viewers with every passing week. Fox moved the show around again throughout season 3, shuffling the time slot repeatedly without giving the audience time to adjust. The ratings fell even harder when the schedule kept shifting than they had when the show was competing against Survivor and Friends head-on. In May 2002, Family Guy was removed from Fox's schedule entirely. The network announced the show was gone. One episode from season 3 had never even aired and would sit on a shelf for over a year. At this point, the smart money said Family Guy was finished. The show had been canceled twice. It had lost a ratings war against some of the toughest competition in television history. Fox had tried giving it a second chance and decided the second chance was not working. Nobody was rushing to pick it up. Fox tried to sell the rerun rights to other networks and found almost no interest. Cartoon Network eventually took those rights for practically nothing. The president of 20th Century Fox Television later said the network sold the rerun rights almost for free because no one else wanted them. Cartoon Network started airing Family Guy reruns on Adult Swim in 2003. Adult Swim was the late-night block that ran adult-oriented animated programming programming, starting at around 10 p.m. The audience that watched Adult Swim was exactly the audience that had never been able to find Family Guy on Fox because the network kept moving it around. They watched the reruns, they loved the show, and they kept watching. Family Guy became the highest-rated program on Adult Swim, averaging around 1.9 million viewers per episode in reruns. For comparison, the show had been pulling far smaller numbers in primetime on a major network. Then came the DVD sales. Fox released the first 2 seasons of Family Guy on DVD in April 2003. Within a month, nearly 400,000 copies had sold. By the end of the year, the season set had moved over 2 million copies. The Family Guy DVD set became the best-selling television DVD of 2003. The only television DVD that had ever sold more than the Family Guy set at that point was the first season of Chappelle's Show. For a canceled show, one that Fox had dumped for practically nothing, those numbers were impossible to ignore. Steve Feldstein, who was a Fox home entertainment executive at the time, described the situation this way. There was a fan base lying dormant. The show had a huge audience that Fox had never properly managed to reach because the network kept burying the show in terrible time slots against impossible competition. When those fans finally had a way to watch Family Guy on their own terms, at their own pace, without worrying about what night it was airing or whether Fox had moved it again, they showed up in enormous numbers. The DVD sales data landed on Fox's desk alongside the Adult Swim ratings, and the math was suddenly very clear. There were millions of people who wanted to watch this show. Fox had canceled it twice, and those millions of people had been waiting for it to come back. In 2004, Fox announced that Family Guy would return for a 4th season. It was the first time in the history of major American network television that a canceled show had been brought back based on DVD sales. That had simply never happened before. The 4th season premiered in May 2005, on Sunday nights in the safe slot right after The Simpsons, which is where the show should have been all along. The premiere drew strong ratings. The show has been on the air continuously ever since, eventually surpassing 400 episodes and becoming one of the longest-running animated series in American television history. It has won 8 Emmy Awards. The entire first cancellation was a scheduling problem. Fox took a new show that was performing reasonably well in a good time slot and threw it against shows that were destroying everything they competed against. The second cancellation followed from the first. A show that had never been allowed to properly grow its audience was canceled for failing to grow its audience. The network then sold the rights for almost nothing, watched the show explode on a different platform with a different scheduling approach, and had to publicly acknowledge they had made a serious error. What makes this story worth sitting with is the specifics. Family Guy's pilot drew 22 million viewers. That is not a show that struggled to find an audience from day one. The audience was there. Fox just kept making it nearly impossible for that audience to find the show. Move it to Thursdays against Frasier. Move it again. Move it again. Cancel it. Bring it back. Put it against Friends and Survivor. Move it around again. Cancel it again. In between all of that movement, the show was also producing genuinely good television. Season 2 and Season 3 contained many of the episodes that fans still consider the best the show ever made. The same seasons Fox was treating as disposable were the seasons fans were buying millions of DVDs to own permanently. There is also something specific about the time period that made the DVD sales possible. The early 2000s were the peak era of television DVD box sets. People were buying complete seasons of their favorite shows at a rate that had never happened before and has not really happened since. Streaming services did not exist yet. The only way to own a television show and watch it on your schedule was to buy the disc. Family Guy benefited from this window almost perfectly. The show was canceled in 2002, the DVDs came out in 2003, and by the time Fox reversed course in 2004, the entire entertainment industry could see exactly what had happened. The fan base that Fox thought did not exist had proven itself in the only way that mattered to a network: money. Seth MacFarlane was 25 years old when Family Guy first aired. He was 31 when it came back. The show that returned in 2005 was the same show, with the same characters, the same voice cast, and the same creative team. But it came back carrying something extra. It came back with the knowledge that it had survived something that kills most television shows permanently. Most canceled shows never get the chance that Family Guy got, and the ones that do usually do not make the most of it. Family Guy's Season 4 premiere opened with Peter Griffin listing all the Fox shows that had failed in the 3 years Family Guy was off the air. It was a very long list. The joke worked because everyone watching knew it was true. The cancellation story is not just a footnote to what came after. It shaped the show's entire second life. The writers, the creative team, and MacFarlane himself all knew that Family Guy had been given back something that almost never gets given back. That awareness runs through the revival era in ways both obvious and quiet, and it helps explain some of the choices the show made in the years that followed. Before we move on. If you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the cancellations were not the strangest thing that almost ended Family Guy before it could come back. The strangest thing happened on a Tuesday morning in September 2001 at an airport in Boston when the creator of the show was running late. Section 2. Seth MacFarlane missed American Airlines Flight 11 by 10 minutes. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Seth MacFarlane was supposed to be on a plane. Not just any plane, American Airlines Flight 11, departing from Boston Logan International Airport, headed to Los Angeles. The flight took off at 7:45 in the morning. MacFarlane was booked on it. His name was on the passenger list. He had every reason to be sitting in that cabin when the doors closed. He was not. Two things happened the night before that changed everything. MacFarlane had traveled to his old college to give a speech to students and faculty. After the speech, he went out with some of the faculty members and had a few drinks. He stayed out later than he should have. By the time he got to sleep, he had already lost a meaningful chunk of the night. That alone might not have been enough to make him late. The second thing is what sealed it. His travel agent had written down the wrong departure time on his itinerary. The flight left at 7:45 in the morning. The itinerary said 8:15. MacFarlane woke up the next morning believing he had 30 extra minutes that he did not actually have. He was operating on incorrect information, moving at a pace that would have gotten him to the airport on time for a flight that left at 8:15, heading toward a gate that had already closed 10 minutes earlier. He arrived at the check-in counter and told the agent he was booked on Flight 11. The agent told him he was too late. The gate had closed. The plane was gone. MacFarlane went to the airport lounge and fell asleep. He woke up roughly 45 minutes later to noise around him. People were gathered around televisions. Something was happening. He looked at the screen and saw that the first plane had hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. He sat there and watched the second plane hit. Then the news announced which flight had crashed into the North Tower. It was Flight 11, the plane he had been booked on, the plane he had missed by 10 minutes. MacFarlane described this moment in an interview with Piers Morgan years later. He said he turned to the person sitting next to him in the airport lounge and said that he had been booked on that flight, that he was late and had missed it. He described watching the coverage and processing the fact that everyone on board was gone. All 92 people on Flight 11 died that morning. The plane struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., less than an hour after MacFarlane had been told he was too late to board. He had called his assistant before going to sleep in the lounge to let them know he had missed his flight and would be taking a later one. The message was not received until more than 20 minutes after the North Tower was hit. For those 20 minutes, the people closest to MacFarlane did not know whether he was alive. Family Guy was in a precarious position on September 11th, 2001. The show had been canceled after season 2 in May 2000, then given a last-minute reprieve and renewed for season 3. Season 3 was in the middle of airing when the attacks happened. The show was already in a weak position in the ratings, already competing against Friends and Survivor, already being shuffled around the schedule by Fox. MacFarlane was the creator, the showrunner, and the voice of 4 main characters simultaneously. Peter Griffin, Brian Griffin, Stewie Griffin, and Quagmire were all voiced by the same person who had just barely made it out of Boston Logan alive. If the travel agent had written down the right departure time, or if MacFarlane had gone to bed an hour earlier the night before, the history of Family Guy ends in September 2001. There is no season 4. There is no revival. There is no 400-episode run. The show gets canceled in 2002, stays canceled, and the DVDs that brought it back never carry the same weight because the person who made it is gone. MacFarlane was not the only person connected to entertainment who was supposed to be on Flight 11 that morning. Mark Wahlberg, who would later co-star with MacFarlane in the Ted films, had also been booked on Flight 11. Wahlberg changed his plans at the last minute after receiving an invitation to attend the Toronto Film Festival, choosing to charter a private plane to Canada instead. He was not on Flight 11 when it took off. Wahlberg later made public comments about what he believed he would have done if he had been on the plane, suggesting he would have been able to prevent the crash. Those comments drew significant backlash, and he eventually apologized for them. MacFarlane never made any comparable statement. He spoke about the experience with a notable quietness, describing what happened factually, without layering it in dramatic framing. The relationship between the September 11th attacks and Family Guy is complicated in a specific way that goes beyond MacFarlane's near miss. The show had already, before the attacks, put Osama bin Laden in an episode. In Season 2's Road to Rhode Island, which aired on May 30th, 2000, more than a year before the attacks, there is a scene where Stewie sings a song to distract airport security from the weapons in his bag. After pulling it off, Stewie says something about hoping bin Laden does not know show tunes. The camera then cuts to bin Laden in another security line, doing the exact same thing with his own bag. The scene aired once, in May 2000, and was then removed from every subsequent subsequent version of the episode after September 11th. The DVD release cut it. Syndication cut it. For years, the scene existed only on a specific collector's DVD set. McFarlane later referenced the bin Laden scene in a DVD commentary, joking that the moral of the scene was that the FBI should watch Family Guy more often. The joke landed differently after 2001 than it would have in 2000, which is probably why the scene was removed rather than left in. The attack also directly affected Family Guy's airing schedule. The first episode to air after September 11th, 2001 was A Fish Out of Water, which went out 8 days after the attacks on September 19th. The show continued its season 3 run through that fall in its very difficult Thursday night time slot, eventually getting canceled again the following spring. The connection between the attacks and the show's second cancellation is not a direct line, but the broader point is that Family Guy was in a fragile enough state in the fall of 2001 that almost anything could have finished it off. The attacks damaged the ratings environment for entertainment television across the board during that period. The show was already struggling. Years after the revival, McFarlane made several references to September 11th within Family Guy episodes. The season 11 episode Back to the Pilot, which aired in 2011, involves Brian traveling back in time and preventing the September 11th attacks. In the episode, preventing the attacks leads to a chain of events that causes even worse outcomes, and Brian and Stewie eventually decide to allow the attacks to happen in order to restore the proper timeline. The episode was controversial in its own right, though for different reasons than the Bin Laden airport scene. What makes the near miss on Flight 11 genuinely hard to process is the chain of small things that had to go wrong for McFarlane to survive. One drink fewer the night before, and he goes to sleep earlier and wakes up with more time. The travel agent writes down 7:45 instead of 8:15, and McFarlane is at the gate on time. He catches a cab a few minutes faster in the morning and makes it through security before the gate closes. Any single one of those variables flips, and McFarlane is on Flight 11 when it leaves the ground. The show that Fox would eventually beg to come back in 2005 never comes back because the person who makes it possible is gone. Instead, a hungover 27-year-old ran slightly late to an airport, was told he had missed his flight, found a couch in an airport lounge, fell asleep, and woke up to find out he had missed the most catastrophic morning in American history by a single closed gate. McFarlane spoke about the experience over the years without what most people would expect from someone in that position. There was no public spiritual transformation, no dramatic announcement about a changed perspective on life. He continued making the show. He continued making comedy. He continued referencing September 11th in his work with a strange, particular directness that probably only makes sense when you understand that he was at the airport that morning. The Bin Laden joke that had to be cut from the DVD, the time travel episode that forced characters to decide whether to allow the attacks to happen, the DVD commentary making dark jokes about the FBI's television watching habits. These are not the choices of someone who has distanced himself from that morning. They are the choices of someone who has never quite been able to look away from it. The near miss is also, in a sideways kind of way, connected to why the show existed long enough to be worth saving when Fox eventually came back around. McFarlane was the engine of Family Guy, in a way that almost no single person is the engine of a major network television show. He voiced 4 main characters. He was the creator and showrunner. He wrote and directed significant portions of the material. Losing him in September 2001 would not have been the same as losing one cast member or one writer. It would have been closer to losing the show's entire center of gravity at once. The revival in 2005 was built on the foundation that McFarlane came back to. Without him, there is no foundation. None of this is something Family Guy ever addressed directly on screen. The show did not do an episode about McFarlane's near miss. It did not run a tribute or dedication. The closest thing the show ever came to acknowledging what happened at Boston Logan that morning is the string of September 11th references scattered across the later seasons, none of which are played for straight emotion, all of which carry a specific energy that only really makes sense if you know what the person writing them was doing on the morning of September 11th, 2001. He was asleep in an airport lounge, having missed his flight by 10 minutes, about to wake up to news that changed the direction of his life and kept his show alive long enough to become one of the longest-running animated series in the history of American television. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The morning McFarlane spent in that airport lounge saved Family Guy. What the show did with the time it bought is a different story entirely, and the first chapter of that story began with an episode that Fox refused to air for 4 years because they were afraid of what people might think. Section 3, the Bin Laden airport scene, erased from history. Most people who have seen every episode of Family Guy have never seen the original version of Road to Rhode Island. They think they have. They remember the episode. Brian and Stewie missed their flight home from Palm Springs earrings and spend the episode making their way across the country together. There is a musical number. There is the moment where Brian visits the puppy farm where he was born and meets his mother, stuffed and mounted on a wall. It is widely considered one of the best episodes the show ever made. The cast and crew have called it their favorite. Seth MacFarlane has referred to it as everybody's favorite episode. It aired on May 30th, 2000 during season 2, and it was the episode that proved Brian and Stewie could carry a story on their own, which led directly to every Road to episode that followed. But there is a scene in that episode that most people watching it today have never seen, because it was removed from almost every version of the episode that has existed since September 2001. The scene happens at the airport. Stewie is trying to get through security, and his bag is full of weapons. Rather than hide them, he creates a distraction. He breaks into a song called On the Good Ship Lollipop, dancing and performing for the security staff until their attention drifts away from the X-ray machine and his bag passes through unexamined. After he pulls it off, he says something to the effect that he hopes Osama bin Laden does not know show tunes. Then the camera moves to another security line in the airport. Bin Laden is there. In line, his bag, presumably also full of things he should not be carrying. He does exactly what Stewie just did. He launches into a song called I Hope I Get It from the Broadway musical A Chorus Line. He sings it, the security staff gets distracted, and his bag passes through the X-ray machine without anyone checking what is inside. That is the scene. Roughly 30 seconds of animation, made in 1999 or early 2000, that aired exactly once on American television, on May 30th, 2000, and then effectively disappeared. After September 11th, 2001, the scene was pulled from every subsequent airing of the episode. It was removed from the Region 1 DVD release of the Season 2 box set, meaning the version that American audiences bought at stores did not include it. It was cut from the syndication package that went to other networks. It was cut from Cartoon Network's Adult Swim airings. For years, the only way to see the original version of the scene was to own a specific DVD collection called the Family Guy Freakin' Sweet Collection, which preserved the original cut of the episode. It was also available on some international DVD releases in Germany and the United Kingdom. Eventually, after 2017, the scene was quietly restored to the version of the episode available on Hulu in the United States. The reason for the removal was obvious enough that nobody at Fox ever needed to say it out loud. A comedic scene showing Osama bin Laden successfully bypassing airport security by singing a show tune, made more than a year before the September 11th attacks, was not something any American television network was going to leave in a syndicated episode in the fall of 2001. The fact that the scene had been made before the attacks, the fact that it was clearly a joke with no connection to actual events, the fact that it had already aired on television once without causing any particular outrage, none of that mattered against the reality of what had happened. The scene existed, it featured the man responsible for the deaths of nearly 3,000 people, outsmarting airport security with a song, and it was going to be removed from the episode. That was not a complicated decision for the network. What makes it genuinely strange is the timing of the whole thing. The scene aired on May 30th, 2000. At that point, bin Laden was a known figure. He had been responsible for the 1998 bombings of United States embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, attacks that killed over 200 people. He was not an obscure name. The writers who put him in that scene were referencing someone they knew their audience would recognize. The joke worked because viewers would immediately understand who bin Laden was and why the image of him singing show tunes to bypass airport security was absurd. The joke was, at its core, about the gap between the seriousness of what bin Laden represented and the complete silliness of what he was doing in the scene. That is the kind of joke Family Guy made constantly. And in the year 2000, it landed as exactly that, a joke. Nobody who watched the episode in May 2000 could have known what was coming 16 months later. Nobody who wrote the scene could have imagined that the specific method of attack they were joking about, someone getting weapons past airport security and onto a plane, would become the method by which nearly 3,000 people were killed in the worst terrorist attack in American history. Seth MacFarlane, the person who created the scene, was booked on American Airlines Flight 11 on September 11th, 2001. He missed it by 10 minutes. He then sat in the airport lounge and watched the news coverage of the plane he had been scheduled to board striking the building it struck. The bin Laden airport joke he had put in his own show 16 months earlier, the joke that that had to be cut from every rerun and DVD release because of what happened that morning, had been made by the same person who came within 10 minutes of dying in the attack the joke had accidentally previewed. That specific fact does not appear to have been widely discussed in any formal way. McFarlane spoke about the Flight 11 near miss in interviews. The bin Laden scene removal was documented and noted. The connection between the two facts, that the same person wrote the joke and almost died in the real version of what the joke was about, sits in the record without much commentary around it. In the DVD commentary for Road to Rhode Island, McFarlane did address the bin Laden scene, noting that the moral of the scene was that the FBI should watch Family Guy more often. This was a joke, obviously. But it was also the only real public comment he made about the scene after its removal. He did not express regret about making it. He did not explain the decision to cut it in any great detail. He made a dark joke about it and moved on, which is consistent with how he handled almost everything connected to September 11th in the years that followed. The episode itself, stripped of the bin Laden scene, went on to become the most beloved episode in Family Guy's entire run, according to most fan rankings and cast and crew commentary. It was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. The musical number Brian and Stewie performed together, set to the tune of The Road to Morocco from the old Bing Crosby and Bob Hope films, became one of the most referenced moments in the show's history. The scene where Brian discovers his mother has been stuffed and mounted by the farm where he was born is one of the few genuinely emotional moments in the show's early run. None of the episode's reputation rests on the deleted scene. Road to Rhode Island would be exactly as beloved without the 30 seconds of bin Laden material. The scene is a footnote in the episode's actual legacy, which is something that cannot be said about the scene's legacy in the broader story of Family Guy and its complicated relationship with events that were too real to joke about. That relationship did not end with the bin Laden removal. The show kept running into versions of the same problem, where comedy that had been written in one context landed in a completely different context because of something that happened in the real world. The bin Laden scene was the first and cleanest example of this. The scene was made before the attacks. It was removed after the attacks. The connection between the scene and the real events was accidental and undeniable at the same time. Later episodes would run into similar problems, but with one key difference. The bin Laden scene was pulled because real events made an old joke impossible to leave in the broadcast version of the episode. Later Family Guy controversies would involve episodes where the real events happened after the episode aired, making a joke that had seemed harmless when it was written look like something very different in the new context. Road to Rhode Island also established something about Family Guy that the bin Laden removal only made clearer. The show was operating in a space where the distance between comedy and real-world horror was very thin. Most of what Family Guy made jokes about was safely fictional. Cartoon violence, absurd characters, exaggerated versions of real people. But the show also made jokes about actual events, actual people, and actual situations in the world. And when those situations changed in ways nobody could predict, the jokes stayed on the record even when they were pulled from the broadcast. The bin Laden scene exists today on Hulu, restored to the episode after more than 15 years of being cut. A viewer watching Road to Rhode Island on Hulu in 2024 can see the original version of the scene that most Family Guy fans for most of the show's history never had access to. It is 30 seconds of animation made in 1999 that was erased from the public version of the episode for over a decade and a half because of what happened on a Tuesday morning in September 2001. McFarlane was at the airport that morning. He had missed his flight. He was asleep in the lounge when the plane took off. The joke he had made about the same airport, the same kind of plane, the same security setup that had been bypassed so catastrophically that morning was already in an episode that had already aired. It was already part of the record, already on the tapes that would become DVDs that would be edited to remove exactly that scene, because the world the scene had been made in no longer existed in the same way after 8:46 in the morning on September 11th, 2001. The removal of one 30-second scene from one episode is a small thing in the context of everything that happened that day, but it is a specific, documented, verifiable moment where the world that Family Guy was making jokes about crashed into the world those jokes were actually living in. And the person who made the joke was sitting in the same airport, watching the same news coverage, having survived the same morning by 10 minutes and a wrong departure time on a travel itinerary. That the bin Laden scene had to be removed is a fact. That the person who made it almost died in the event that forced its removal removal is also a fact. The space between those two facts is not something the show ever tried to address directly, which is perhaps the most Family Guy thing about the whole situation. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next controversy the show walked into was different in almost every way. There was no accident involved, no real-world event that made an old joke unworkable. The next banned episode was planned, written, reviewed, approved for production, and then quietly buried by the network before it ever reached an audience. All because of a stereotype, a song, and a lawsuit that took 9 years to fully resolve. Section 4. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. Banned, then sued. Fox pulled the episode before a single viewer ever saw it on television. No controversy had erupted yet. No angry letters had arrived. No protest groups had formed outside the network's offices. The episode had been written, animated, reviewed by the people whose job it was to review these things, and approved for production. It had gone through the entire process of becoming a finished Family Guy episode. Then Fox looked at what they had and decided they were not going to air it. The episode was called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. It was the 22nd episode of season 3, and it had originally been produced with the intention of airing during season 2, back in the year 2000. The production code on the episode dates it to that earlier period. It sat on a shelf for years before it ever reached an audience, and the reason it sat there is a straightforward one. Fox was afraid that the people watching it would not understand that it was a joke. The plot begins with Peter Griffin losing money. He has been sold volcano insurance by a door-to-door salesman, which means he has paid money for insurance against a volcanic eruption in Quahog, Rhode Island, a place that has absolutely no volcanoes and never has. Peter realizes he has been conned and wants to get his money back. His friends Quagmire and Cleveland suggest that what Peter really needs is a Jewish lawyer to help him out, because Jewish people are good with money. This is a stereotype, presented clearly and plainly as a stereotype, and the episode does not try to hide what it is doing. The joke, as the writers understood it, was that Peter is credulous and ignorant enough to fully believe the stereotype and act on it, without any awareness that believing it says more about him than it says about Jewish people. A man named Max Weinstein then appears outside the Griffin house with car trouble. Peter takes this as a sign from above. He invites Max inside, Max helps him recover the money from the insurance scam, and Peter decides that the experience has taught him something profound, that Jewish people are so reliably good with money and so reliably successful that the best thing he can do for his son Chris is to convert him to Judaism. Peter takes Chris to Las Vegas for a secret bar mitzvah, believing the conversion will guarantee Chris a successful life. Lois finds out, arrives to stop the ceremony. The synagogue erupts in chaos, and the family escapes on a bus. The bus turns out to be full of nuns, who are angry at Peter for leaving the Catholic Church, and they attack him with rulers. The episode also contains a musical number. Peter, wanting to find a Jewish person to help him, sings a song called I Need a Jew. The song is a parody of When You Wish Upon a Star, the Disney song from the 1940 film Pinocchio. The parody follows the same melody as the original, but replaces the lyrics with Peter's search for Jewish financial help. The lyrics include lines that connect Jewish people to the death of Jesus Christ, which is itself one of the oldest and most damaging anti-Semitic ideas in history. The episode presents Peter singing these lines as evidence of his ignorance, not as the show's own position. The gap between what Peter believes and what the audience is supposed to understand is the entire joke. Fox looked at all of this and decided they were not comfortable putting it on television. Their concern was specific, that viewers would watch the episode and take Peter's beliefs at face value, interpreting the show as genuinely endorsing anti-Semitic stereotypes rather than mocking the kind of person who holds them. Whether that concern was reasonable or overcautious is a question people have argued about since the episode finally did air. What is not in question is that Fox made a deliberate choice to sit on the episode rather than risk the reaction. The episode stayed off the air for 3 years. Then, Cartoon Network's Adult Swim aired it on November 9th, 2003, as part of their Family Guy rerun block. At this point, the show had been canceled for over a year and was living its second life in syndication, building the audience that would eventually convince Fox to bring it back. When Adult Swim aired When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, it did so without the catastrophic audience reaction Fox had feared. People watched it, some found it funny, some found it uncomfortable, and the television did not catch fire. Fox aired the episode themselves on December 10th, 2004. By this point, the show's revival had already been announced, and season 4 was in production. When the episode finally ran on Fox, the version that aired was slightly different from the version that had been on the season 2 DVD release. The specific lyric in the I Need a Jew song that referenced Jewish people killing Jesus Christ was changed. The DVD version of the song contained that line. The television version that aired on Fox replaced it with a different line that made the same rhyme without the Jesus reference. Different different versions of the episode therefore existed simultaneously, the DVD version with the original lyrics and the broadcast version with the altered lyrics. Before the episode aired on Adult Swim in 2003, McFarlane appeared on camera to introduce it. He described it as the episode that Fox had refused to air because they felt it was too risky, and then added that in this case, too risky meant anything that does not feature Paris Hilton half naked on the hood of a car. He also described the episode as being centered around Peter Griffin's misconceptions of the Jewish community. The introduction was itself a joke, but it also contained a real point. Fox's hesitation about the episode existed alongside a network lineup that had no shortage of content that was offensive or provocative in other directions. The episode had already been released on the Season 2 DVD box set in 2003, before it ever aired on television. This meant that, for the first time, a significant number of Family Guy fans had watched an episode of the show before it had ever been broadcast. The DVD release happened in April 2003. Adult Swim aired the episode in November 2003. Fox aired it in December 2004. The episode reached audiences in 3 separate waves, which is an unusual path for any television episode. Then, 3 years after the Adult Swim airing, the lawsuit arrived. On October 3rd, 2007, a music publishing company called The Bourne Company filed a lawsuit against Fox and Seth MacFarlane. The Bourne Company owned the rights to When You Wish Upon a Star, the Disney song that the I Need a Jew number was based on. Their lawsuit claimed that the Family Guy parody was not actually a parody, but a direct copy of their song, and that the offensive nature of the new lyrics had caused damage to the reputation and value of the original. The lawsuit sought unspecified financial damages and also sought to stop the episode from being distributed further. The legal argument the Bourne Company was making was that a true parody has to be commenting on the original work it is based on. Their position was that I Need a Jew was not making any joke about When You Wish Upon a Star specifically. It was using the melody of the Disney song as a vehicle for a joke about Peter Griffin and Jewish stereotypes, without the joke having anything to say about the original song itself. Under that reading, the song was not protected as parody, but was simply a copy of their property with different words. Fox and MacFarlane's legal team argued the opposite. Their position was that the song was clearly a parody, that the choice to use the melody of When You Wish Upon a Star was itself part of the joke, and that the parody was protected under the fair use rules that exist in American copyright law. Fair use allows people to use portions of copyrighted material without permission in certain circumstances, including when the use is for the purpose of parody or commentary. On March 17, 2009, a federal judge named Deborah Batts ruled in favor of Fox and MacFarlane. The judge found that I Need a Jew was a parody and was therefore protected under fair use. The ruling noted that the lyrics of the new song were significantly different from the original, that the amount of the original song used was no more than what was needed to make the parody recognizable, and that the new song had not caused any measurable financial damage to the original. The lawsuit was dismissed. Fox and MacFarlane did not have to pay damages, and the episode continued to be distributed. The lawsuit had taken nearly 2 years from filing to resolution. During that time, the episode continued to air in syndication and remained available on DVD. The legal threat did not pull the episode from circulation while the case was being decided. What the lawsuit added to the story of When You Wish Upon a Weinstein is a layer that sits completely separately from the original controversy about anti-Semitism. Fox had been worried about public reaction to the content of the episode. The lawsuit was not about public reaction. The lawsuit was about the song. 2 entirely different kinds of problems came out of the same episode, separated by years, originating from different directions entirely. The episode today is part of the regular Family Guy rotation. It airs in syndication, it streams on Hulu, and it is available on DVD in the version with the altered television lyrics. The original DVD version with the unaltered song also still exists. Most viewers watching the episode today are watching the broadcast version rather than the original, without necessarily knowing there is a difference between the two. What the episode represents in the context of Family Guy's longer history is the first clear example of the network and the show working against each other over content. Fox approved the episode for production, then Fox decided not to air it. Then Adult Swim aired it. Then Fox aired it themselves, with changes. The episode eventually reached its audience through a path that nobody involved had planned from the beginning. MacFarlane had been warned by Fox about the episode's content before production was finished. This was not the first time that kind of warning had been delivered, and it was not the last. The pattern of Fox having concerns about specific episodes and the show pushing forward with the content anyway became one of the defining dynamics of Family Guy's relationship with its network over the following seasons. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein was where that dynamic dynamic first became fully visible. The 3 years the episode spent sitting on a shelf while Fox decided what to do with it also happened to be the 3 years that the show itself was off the air. The episode that Fox was too nervous to broadcast was a canceled show's unreleased content, sitting in storage while the DVDs of other episodes were selling millions of copies and convincing Fox to bring the whole thing back. There is a particular irony in the fact that the episode Fox was afraid to show to people became available to audiences at almost exactly the same moment the network was deciding the show deserved a second life. The content Fox had been scared of landed without destroying anything. The lawsuit Fox had not anticipated took 2 years to resolve and was ultimately decided in the show's favor. The episode that had been produced in 2000, shelved, released on DVD in 2003, aired on Adult Swim in 2003, aired on Fox in 2004, and then fought over in court from 2007 to 2009, eventually settled into the permanent record as one of the more straightforwardly remembered early episodes of Family Guy. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the controversy over When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, significant as it was, turned out to be a preview of something much larger. The next episode Fox refused to air never made it to television in the United States at all. Years after the Weinstein episode finally ran on Fox, another Family Guy episode was produced, approved, announced publicly, aired in the United Kingdom, released on DVD, and still has never been broadcast on American television to this day. And the reason it was banned had nothing to do with stereotypes or song parodies. It had to do with abortion, advertiser money, and a Fox executive admitting on the record that the decision was purely about business. Section 5. Partial Terms of Endearment. The episode that never aired in America. Fox did not ban this episode because it was poorly made. They did not ban it because the writing was bad, or because the jokes failed, or because Seth MacFarlane had done something reckless without thinking it through. The critics who eventually reviewed the episode when it became available on DVD largely praised it. The writer of the episode, before sitting down to work on the script, had been asked by MacFarlane to read a published essay by the scientist Carl Sagan about abortion, an essay in which Sagan argued that a person could hold both pro-life and pro-choice positions simultaneously, depending on the stage of pregnancy being discussed. The episode was built on that foundation. It was approved for production by 20th Century Fox. It went through the entire process of being made into a finished episode of television. Then, Fox Broadcasting, the network arm of the same company, exercised their right not to air it. The episode is called Partial Terms of Endearment. It is the 21st episode of Season 8. In it, Lois runs into an old college friend named Naomi at her 20-year reunion. Naomi and her husband Dale cannot have children on their own, and Naomi asks Lois to be a surrogate mother and carry their baby. After some resistance from Peter, who initially misunderstands what is being proposed and assumes the situation is heading somewhere else entirely, Lois agrees to the arrangement. She becomes pregnant as a surrogate. Then, Naomi and Dale are killed in a car accident. With the biological parents gone, Lois is left holding a pregnancy that has no family waiting for it. The decision about what to do becomes entirely hers and Peter's. Peter, after watching a film shown to him by an anti-abortion protester, becomes strongly opposed to ending the pregnancy. He goes to increasingly extreme lengths to try to prevent Lois from making any decision he disagrees with. The episode contains a sequence that parodies Looney Tunes cartoons, in which Peter lures Lois out to the desert and attempts to engineer a miscarriage through a series of physical traps, all of which fail in the style of Wile E. Coyote. The miscarriage kit Peter uses in the sequence is branded as an Acme product, which is the fictional company Wile E. Coyote orders from in the original cartoons. Lois ultimately decides to have an abortion. The episode ends with Peter breaking the fourth wall and telling the audience directly that the abortion happened. The show announces at the 2009 San Diego Comic-Con that this episode exists and that Fox has decided not to air it. The announcement is made before Season 8 has even begun its regular broadcast run. This means that Family Guy was publicly announcing a banned episode before the season the episode belonged to had started airing. The fans who would spend that season watching new episodes every week knew, from before the season started, that there was one episode they were not going to see. Kevin Riley, who was the president of Fox Entertainment at the time, gave a public explanation for the decision. His explanation was notably direct. He said that of all the issues Family Guy had ever touched, abortion was the one that seemed to be the most sensitive. He acknowledged that the economy was struggling at the time and that advertiser conversations were already difficult. He said the episode felt like it could cause trouble and that it was simply not worth it. Riley also said, on the record, that he thought the episode handled the subject fine. He was not saying the episode was irresponsible or poorly done. He was saying that the business risk of airing it outweighed any other consideration. The concern was about advertisers. Companies that buy advertising time on television shows do not want their products associated with content that generates controversy or causes viewers to complain. Abortion, Riley explained, was the issue most likely to push advertisers to pull their money from the network. Fox made a financial calculation, and the episode lost. MacFarlane pushed back on the decision publicly. In an interview with the New York Times, he argued against the idea of banning controversial material. He also said that based on how previous situations had played out, he expected Fox would eventually run the episode. The Weinstein episode had been held back and then eventually aired. MacFarlane assumed the same pattern would happen with partial terms of endearment. He was wrong. The episode has never aired in the United States on any television network. What happened instead followed several different paths. The episode premiered in the United Kingdom on BBC Three on June 20th, 2010, airing in its regular Sunday night time slot at 10:30 in the evening. Nearly 1 million homes in the UK watched it during that original airing. BBC Three treated the episode as a normal part of Season 8's broadcast run and aired it without any particular fanfare about the American ban. British critics reviewed it alongside the other Season 8 episodes, and the response was generally positive. The episode was included in the Family Guy Season 8 DVD box set, which went on sale in the United States on September 28, 2010. This created a situation where American fans could own the episode on disc and watch it at home, but the episode could not be broadcast on American television. The DVD release included the episode as part of the standard season package, not as a bonus or a special feature, but simply as the episode it was always meant to be. Adult Swim, which had aired the Weinstein episode after Fox initially refused to broadcast it, declined to air partial terms of endearment. Fox had asked Adult Swim not to carry the episode, and Adult Swim agreed. This was different from the Weinstein situation, where Adult Swim had stepped in and given the episode its American broadcast debut. With partial terms of endearment, both networks declined, leaving the episode without any American television home. The episode has also never been available on Hulu, which carries every other Family Guy episode, including the uncut and extended versions of several that were edited for their original broadcast. Hulu's Family Guy library, which is otherwise comprehensive, stops at partial terms of endearment. When Disney acquired the rights to stream Family Guy, the episode also did not appear on Disney+. At various points, the episode has been reported as having been removed from streaming services, even in regions where it had previously been available. The episode itself, when viewed, is a piece of television that holds both sides of the abortion debate up for examination through the specific lens of Family Guy's style. Peter's anti-abortion position is portrayed through his usual combination of ignorance, enthusiasm, and catastrophically bad reasoning. The scene where Peter tries to induce a miscarriage using Acme products is played as a Looney Tunes parody, because Peter's understanding of the situation is roughly as sophisticated as a cartoon character who spends his life chasing a bird through a desert. Brian counters Peter's position at one point by asking what should happen in a case where a woman is raped. Peter's response, which is that maybe she should have thought about that before asking him for directions, is the show demonstrating exactly how shallow Peter's reasoning is. Lois, on the other side, goes through a genuine process of weighing the decision. She considers what the biological parents would have wanted. She considers her own feelings about what she agreed to. She considers Peter's position, even as she watches him reach that position through completely unreliable means. The episode does not frame her final decision as obviously right or obviously wrong. It frames it as her decision, made by her, in a situation that has no clean answer. Cindy White of IGN reviewed the DVD release and gave it a 7 out of 10, noting that she appreciated the fact that the writers did not take the easy way out at the end, and that they actually picked a side. She also observed that it was hard to believe the writers ever genuinely expected the episode to make it to air. The reviewer at DVD Talk described the episode as fairly standard Family Guy material in terms of its overall construction, finding the satire aimed primarily at the pro-life position through Peter's exaggerated behavior. Mary Elizabeth Williams, writing for the publication Salon, made a point that went beyond the episode itself. She noted that Family Guy, a show that is regularly dismissed as lowbrow and juvenile, had done something that almost no other American television show had managed to do, which was to address abortion directly and take a position on it. She described it as remarkable that a show with Family Guy's reputation had gone to a place that prestige dramas and critically respected comedies had been unwilling to go. The episode was performed as a live table read at a theater in Hollywood on August 12, 2009, before it had been broadcast anywhere. The reading was put together as part of Family Guy's campaign to win Emmy Award votes, since the show had been nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series that year, which made it the first animated show nominated in that category since The Flintstones in 1961. MacFarlane explained the purpose purpose of the table read directly. It was to generate Emmy votes so the show could lose by fewer votes. The cast performed the episode in front of an audience that included Emmy voters. Several guest performers from the episode appeared at the table read, including Will Wheaton, who voices an anti-abortion protester in the episode, and Julia Sweeney, who voices Naomi. The episode was approved for production. It was completed. It was announced publicly. It was performed live for an Emmy audience. It aired in the UK. It was sold on DVD in the US, and it has never been broadcast on American television. The Parents Television Council, which had spent years filing complaints about Family Guy with the FCC and campaigning against the show, did not need to do anything about partial terms of endearment. Fox handled the removal themselves. The organization that had been Family Guy's most persistent outside critic for over a decade did not have to lift a hand to keep this particular episode off American airwaves. The network did it without being asked. What partial terms of endearment represents in the history of Family Guy is a clear line between what the show was willing to make and what the business structure around the show was willing to broadcast. MacFarlane made the episode. He asked his writer to read Carl Sagan before writing the script. He built a story that examined a genuinely difficult situation through the show's specific comedic approach. He believed, based on precedent, that Fox would eventually air it. The network looked at the same episode, called it fine, and said the financial risk was not worth taking. The gap between those two positions, between the creative team saying this is good television and the network saying this is too expensive a risk, is what produced the only episode in Family Guy's history that has never aired in the country that made it. The ban on partial terms of endearment is clean and documented. Fox said why they did it. The Fox Entertainment president gave a recorded explanation. No conspiracy, no hidden story, no behind-the-scenes drama that has never come out. A business decision was made, it was explained on the record, and the episode has lived in that particular limbo ever since. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next controversy on this list is different in almost every way. There was no deliberate ban, no advance announcement, no network president explaining the decision to the press. Instead, an episode aired on schedule, a month passed, and then the real world produced an event so terrible that the episode had to be pulled from every platform immediately. And to make it worse, someone on the internet edited 2 scenes from the episode together and convinced a significant number of people that Family Guy had predicted a mass casualty attack before it happened. Section 6, Turban Cowboy and the Boston Marathon Catastrophe. The episode aired on March 17th, 2013, and nobody pulled it. At the time, there was no reason to. Turban Cowboy was the 15th episode of season 11, written by Artie Johan and Sean Reese, and directed by Joe Vox. It drew 4.92 million viewers on its original broadcast night and pulled a 2.4 rating in the 18 to 49 age group that advertisers care most about, making it the most watched show on Fox's animation domination lineup that night, beating The Simpsons, Bob's Burgers, and The Cleveland Show. By the numbers, the episode was a success. Critics were less enthusiastic. The AV Club gave it a D, with reviewer Kevin McFarland writing that the episode felt like something made in 2002 and left on a shelf for a decade, noting its portrayal of a Middle Eastern character as a terrorist was completely predictable and tired. But a bad review is not a ban. The episode aired, people watched it, critics complained about the quality, and the show moved on to the following week. Then, April 15th, 2013 arrived. On that Monday afternoon, 2 bombs exploded near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. The bombs had been placed in pressure cooker containers and left in bags on the sidewalk. They detonated 14 seconds apart, roughly 210 yards from each other, at 2:49 in the afternoon, when thousands of runners and spectators were gathered at the finish line. 3 people were killed, hundreds more were injured. 17 people lost limbs. The attack was carried out by 2 brothers, Johar and Tamerlan Sarnayev, who had built the bombs themselves and left them in the crowd before walking away. Within hours of the attack, something began circulating online that made an already devastating day significantly more complicated for Family Guy and for Fox. Someone had taken 2 separate scenes from Turban Cowboy and edited them together into a single clip. The first scene was one where Peter Griffin runs through the Boston Marathon in his car, hitting runners as he goes. This scene exists in the actual episode as a cutaway gag, one of Family Guy's standard format jokes, where the main story pauses briefly for a disconnected expected comedic image. In the actual episode, the joke is about Peter claiming he won the Boston Marathon, and the cutaway shows how he actually did it by driving his car through the course. It is a standalone joke with no connection to any bombing or explosion. The second scene the editor used was from a different part of the same episode. In the main plot of Turban Cowboy, Peter has befriended a Muslim man named Mahmoud, who turns out to be a terrorist.
Toward the end of the episode, there is a scene where Peter accidentally sets off an explosion by dialing a cell phone number that is connected to the terrorist's bomb detonator. The bridge explodes. This scene has nothing to do with the Boston Marathon. In the episode, it happens nowhere near the marathon and involves a bridge, not a finish line crowd. The person who made the edited clip removed everything between these two scenes and placed them back to back. In the manufactured version, Peter runs through the Boston Marathon with his car, and then immediately the bridge explodes, with the cell phone detonation making the explosions look like they were caused by the marathon scene. The edited clip was constructed to make it appear that a Family Guy episode had depicted someone using a cell phone to remotely detonate bombs at the Boston Marathon. This is not what the episode shows. The two scenes come from completely different parts of the episode and have no connection to each other in the actual broadcast. Alex Jones, a radio host and conspiracy theorist who ran a website called InfoWars, promoted the edited clip. He posted it on his website and on Twitter, suggesting that Family Guy had predicted or inspired the Boston Marathon bombing. The clip spread rapidly. People who had not seen the actual episode watched the edited version and had no way of knowing that the two scenes had been manufactured into a false sequence. The clip was presented as something real, and to someone who had not watched Turban Cowboy when it aired a month earlier, it looked real enough to be alarming. McFarlane responded on Twitter the same day. He wrote that the edited Family Guy clip currently circulating is abhorrent. He described the bombing as a crime and a tragedy, and said his thoughts were with the victims. Seth Green, who voices Chris Griffin and is a regular presence in the Family Guy production world, retweeted McFarlane's statement. The response from the show's team was immediate and unambiguous. The edited clip was a fake. The episode had not predicted the bombing. The two scenes have been taken from different parts of the episode and joined together to create something the episode never actually contained. Fox acted the same day. On April 16th, 2013, a Fox spokesperson confirmed that the network had removed Turban Cowboy from Fox.com and from Hulu. Amazon also pulled the episode. Fox stated that it had no immediate plans to broadcast the episode again. The episode was gone from every major platform within 24 hours of the bombing. YouTube flagged and removed several versions of the edited clip, marking them as potentially offensive or inappropriate. The platform did not catch every copy immediately, and the clip continued to circulate in various forms for some time. But the official response from both Fox and YouTube was to treat the manufactured version of the clip as something that should not be available. The original episode, the actual unedited broadcast version, contains things that are genuinely uncomfortable, independent of the conspiracy clip. The main plot involves Peter befriending a Muslim man, and the friendship eventually revealing that the Muslim man is a radical terrorist. The episode attempts, at certain points, to make an anti-prejudice argument through Brian, who calls out Joe and Quagmire for being suspicious of Mahmoud before his true intentions are revealed. But the twist of the episode confirms that Joe and Quagmire's suspicions were correct, which undercuts whatever anti-prejudice point the episode was reaching toward. The AV Club's review noted this problem directly, pointing out that an episode cannot effectively argue against Islamophobia while simultaneously making the Muslim character a terrorist whose terrorist nature is the episode's central revelation. None of that made the episode unique as a Family Guy controversy. The show had a long history of episodes that handled sensitive subjects clumsily. What made Turban Cowboy different was the bombing, and what made the bombing's relationship to the episode different from any other real-world event colliding with a Family Guy joke was the fake clip. The Bin Laden airport scene had been removed after September 11th because of what had actually happened in the show. A character who represented a real terrorist had been depicted outsmarting airport security. The connection between the scene and the real attacks was accidental, but direct. With Turban Cowboy, the connection between the episode and the real bombing was manufactured. The episode did not show what the edited clip showed. The clip was a lie, and the lie spread fast enough and wide enough to force Fox to pull a legally broadcast, officially aired episode from every platform within a single day. The episode stayed off American streaming services for over 9 years. Turban Cowboy was not restored to Hulu until September 2022. From April 2013 to September 2022, the episode was essentially unavailable to American streaming audiences. It continued to be available in some international markets, including on Fox 8 in Australia and on ITV2 in the United Kingdom. In those countries, there was no equivalent event that had made the episode impossible to air. The ban was
specific to the American context, driven by an American tragedy and the American conspiracy theory that had attached itself to the episode in the immediate aftermath. The episode is also available on physical DVD releases, which were never recalled or altered. Someone who owns the season 11 DVD set has always had access to Turban Cowboy. The removal was specifically from streaming and broadcast, not from the physical product that already existed in people's homes. McFarlane's public response to the situation was limited to his initial tweet condemning the edited clip. He did not give extended interviews about the episode or the bombing in the days that followed. The statement he put out was brief, clear, and focused on the manufactured nature of the conspiracy clip rather than on the content of the episode itself. He did not comment on whether he regretted the specific jokes in the episode, and he did not address the underlying criticism that an episode about a Muslim terrorist airing in 2013 was in itself a problem, regardless of the bombing. The broader situation that Turban Cowboy created for Family Guy was a new kind of problem for the show. Previous controversies had involved the show making deliberate creative choices and then facing the consequences of those choices. Fox banning partial terms of endearment was a response to something McFarlane chose to put in an episode. The Weinstein ban was a response to creative content the network was uncomfortable with. In both cases, the controversy was about the actual content of the episode. Turban Cowboy got pulled because of something that had nothing to do with the actual content of the episode. A fake clip was made, a conspiracy theory was attached to it, a real tragedy made the fake clip feel dangerous to leave in circulation, and an episode that had aired without incident a month earlier became untouchable overnight. The show had not done anything new. The episode had not changed. The world had changed, and the episode was caught in the middle of it. The 9-year gap between the episode's removal and its return to streaming is long enough to put it in perspective. Family Guy went through seasons 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and into season 21, while Turban Cowboy sat off American streaming platforms. New episodes were made, new controversies emerged. The show kept running, and one episode from season 11 remained in a kind of suspended state, available on disc, available in other countries, but not streamable in the country that made it. When the episode came back to Hulu in September 2022, it did so quietly. There was no announcement, no press release, no statement from Fox or from McFarlane about the decision to restore it. The episode simply reappeared in the Family Guy library.
Most viewers likely did not notice. The ones who did notice pointed out that partial terms of endearment was still missing, still the only episode in the show's history that remained completely absent from Hulu, making it the sole survivor of a ban that had outlasted every other removal the show had experienced. 2 episodes had been treated as too dangerous to stream. One came back after 9 years. The other has never aired in America at all. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of what gets pulled and what stays pulled, what gets forgiven and what stays banned, runs through Family Guy's entire history in ways that connect to something much larger than any individual episode. Because the next scandal on this list did not involve a network decision, or a conspiracy theory, or a bombing. It involved a former governor of Alaska, her daughter's Facebook page, and an actress with Down syndrome who had the last word in a way that nobody involved had anticipated. Section 7. Sarah Palin vs. Family Guy, The Down Syndrome Firestorm. The episode aired on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2010, Season 8, Episode 12, titled Extra Large Medium. The main plot follows Peter Griffin becoming convinced he has developed the ability to read minds after a head injury during a family hike. The subplot follows Chris Griffin developing a crush on a classmate named Ellen who has Down syndrome. Chris asks Ellen out, they go on a date, and Ellen turns out to be demanding, bossy, and unkind to Chris throughout their time together. The date ends badly. Chris tells Ellen that he had thought people with learning difficulties were different from other people, kinder and more patient, and that he now understands they can be just as selfish and mean as anyone else. The two break up. Partway through the episode, while Chris and Ellen are on their date, Ellen makes a casual remark. She says that her mother is the former governor of Alaska. Sarah Palin had been the governor of Alaska from 2006 until her resignation in July 2009. She had been the Republican vice presidential nominee in the 2008 election, running alongside John McCain against Barack Obama and Joe Biden. She had a son named Trig, who had been born in April 2008 with Down syndrome. By February 2010, Palin was one of the most recognizable political figures in the United States, and the connection between her and a character with Down syndrome, whose mother is described as the former governor of Alaska, was not subtle. The show was not trying to hide what it was doing.
doing. The line was a direct reference to Palin, written to be recognized as such. The episode aired on a Sunday night. By Tuesday, February 16th, Bristol Palin had posted a statement on her mother's Facebook page. Bristol is Sarah Palin's daughter. Her statement said that if the writers of a particularly pathetic cartoon show thought they were being clever in mocking her brother and her family, they had failed. The statement described the show's creators as heartless and said that making fun of a child with Down syndrome was a new low, even for a show with Family Guy's history. Sarah Palin then appeared on the Fox News program The O'Reilly Factor and addressed the episode directly. She described the people who made the show as cruel and cold-hearted. She connected the episode's joke to her son Trig and said the depiction of a character with Down syndrome being used as a vehicle for a joke about her was an attack on her family. The response from the show's creative team came in two separate forms, from two very different people. Steve Callahan, who was a writer on the show, addressed the controversy at San Diego Comic-Con in July 2010 while discussing the upcoming 9th season. His response was brief and combative. He said that for the new season, he had decided to even things out and write something that would offend smart people. McFarlane's response was more measured. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, he defended the episode by pointing to the show's long-standing approach to comedy. He said Family Guy had always used satire as its foundation, and that the show was an equal opportunity offender, meaning no group or individual was off-limits for the kind of jokes the show made. He did not apologize for the episode, and did not indicate that the show had made an error. Then, the third response arrived, from the person nobody had been paying attention to. Andrea Faye Friedman was the actress who had provided the voice for Ellen in the episode. Friedman herself has Down syndrome. She had acted previously in the television series Life Goes On and in other productions. When the Family Guy team was casting the voice of Ellen, they hired an actress who actually has the condition they were depicting, rather than having a cast member imitate a person with Down syndrome. Friedman sent an email to the New York Times. The newspaper published it. In the email, Friedman said she was born with Down syndrome and had played the role of Ellen in the episode that aired on Valentine's Day. She said she guessed that former Governor Palin did not have a sense of humor. She said she thought the line about being the daughter of the former governor of Alaska was very funny, and that the word for what the show was doing was sarcasm. She said her family believed that laughing was good, and that her parents had raised her to have a sense of humor and to live a normal life. Then she added one more line. She said her mother did not carry her around under her arm like a loaf of French bread, the way former Governor Palin carried her son Trig around, looking for sympathy and votes. That line landed harder than anything the show's actual writers had put in the episode. Friedman was not defending a television show from a position of professional obligation. She was a woman with Down syndrome, the same condition Trig Palin had, the same condition the character she had voiced had, telling the person who had made the loudest complaint that the complaint was wrong. She said the joke was aimed at Sarah Palin, not at people with Down syndrome. She said she was not Trig. She said it was her life, and she had found the role enjoyable. The New York Times published a brief interview with Friedman alongside the email. In the interview, Friedman was asked when she found out about the Palin's reaction. She said her mother told her she was on Channel 4, and that when she watched the news coverage and saw Sarah Palin holding Trig, she thought to herself that she was not Trig, and that what she had done was act a role in a television show. She said she had been making fun of Sarah Palin, not of Palin's son. She said the jokes in the episode were not an insult. She said she had fun doing the voiceover, and that it was her first time doing that kind of work. The interviewer asked whether she agreed with Bristol and Sarah Palin that the character and the jokes were insulting to people with Down syndrome. Friedman said it was not an insult. She said she was an actor. She said she was entitled to say something. She said it was really funny. Bill Maher, the host of the HBO program Real Time, also publicly supported McFarlane in the episode following the controversy. His support added another voice to the defense of the episode, but did not carry anywhere near the weight of Friedman's statement, simply because Friedman was speaking from a position that Maher could not occupy. The episode itself contains a musical number called Down Syndrome Girl, performed by Stewie Griffin as Chris prepares for his date with Ellen. The song is a straightforward romantic ballad, sung in the style of a love song about Ellen's qualities. It describes her physical appearance and the feelings Chris has for her, without making her disability the subject of mockery. The song treats Ellen as a person Chris genuinely likes and wants to impress. McFarlane and the show's composer Walter Murphy were nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Music and Lyrics for the song. At the Creative Arts ceremony on August 21, 2010, the song lost the award to a song from the USA Network series, Monk. The nomination was its own form of response to the controversy. An Emmy nomination for a song from an episode that a former vice presidential candidate had called cruel and cold-hearted is a specific kind of statement from the television industry about how it viewed the episode. The Recording Academy voters who nominated the song did not find it to be a piece of content that attacked people with Down syndrome. They found it to be a piece of music worthy of recognition for its craft. The Parents Television Council, which had spent years targeting Family Guy in various ways, criticized the episode during its original broadcast. Their objection was consistent with their general position on the show's content.
Their reaction did not generate anywhere near the coverage that the Palin family's response generated. Partly because by 2010, the PTC criticizing Family Guy was not news in the way that a former governor and vice presidential candidate going after a specific episode on national television was news. The episode received a rating of 6.42 million viewers in its original airing, which was a strong number for the show at that point in its run. The controversy did not appear to drive viewers away. If anything, the public argument between the Palins and the show generated significant media coverage that put the episode in front of people who might not have been watching Family Guy that Sunday night. The critical response to the episode, separate from the political controversy, was mostly positive. Reviewers praised the storyline, the cultural references, and the show's willingness to depict a character with Down syndrome in a way that gave the character both a real personality and real flaws. The choice to cast Friedman, a performer who actually has Down syndrome, in the role was noted by several critics as a meaningful creative decision rather than a lazy one. The show could have had a cast member do an imitation. Instead, they found someone who could do the role from a place of genuine personal experience. What the extra-large medium controversy reveals about Family Guy's position in American culture in 2010 is specific and worth sitting with. The show was capable of generating a news cycle that pulled in a former governor, her daughter, a Fox News program, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, an Emmy nomination, and a response from the person who had actually done the work that started the whole argument. All of this from a subplot in a Valentine's Day episode of an animated show on Fox. The line that triggered the whole thing, the line about Ellen's mother being the former governor of Alaska, is 7 words. 7 words in a 22-minute episode set off a 2-week national conversation about comedy, disability, political figures, and who gets to decide what counts as offensive. The person who most effectively ended that conversation was a woman with Down syndrome who said she had found the whole thing funny and that she was not a loaf of French bread. Friedman's response is the part of this story that has lasted. The Palin's complaints, McFarlane's defense, Callahan's combative Comic-Con remark, Bill Maher's support, the Emmy nomination, the ratings numbers, all of that is documented history. But what people remember when they remember the extra-large medium controversy is usually Andrea Faye Friedman saying what she said to the New York Times. She said it clearly, she said it with humor, and she said it from a position that nobody else in the argument could claim. The show had been called cruel and cold-hearted for depicting a character with Down syndrome as a fully realized person with flaws, wants, and the ability to be unkind. The actress who had given that character her voice said she had fun, she got the joke, and she thought the former governor needed to develop a sense of humor. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Palin controversy was loud and public and resolved in a particular way, but not every Family Guy controversy resolved at all. Some of them left permanent marks. Some of them changed what the show was willing to make, or what audiences were willing to accept from it. The next case on this list is one where the damage was done not by a political figure or a network decision, but by the show itself, in an episode that tried to be serious about something real, and ended up being criticized by people who work with domestic violence survivors for getting almost everything wrong. Section 8. Screams of silence. When Family Guy tried serious and failed. Most Family Guy episodes reset completely by the time the credits roll. Whatever happened during the previous 22 minutes, whatever Peter destroyed, whatever Stewie plotted, whatever Brian attempted and gave up on, the world of Quahog returns to its baseline state. Nobody learns anything permanent. Nobody changes in a way that carries forward. The show runs on the understanding that consequences are temporary, and that next week, everything will be roughly the same as it was before. This is not a flaw, exactly. It is simply how the show is built. Family Guy is a machine designed to produce jokes, and permanent consequences interfere with joke production. The audience accepts this arrangement without complaint, because the jokes are the point. Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, is the episode where the show abandoned that arrangement without having anything to replace it with. The episode is the 3rd episode of season 10. It aired on Fox on October 30th, 2011, a Sunday night, which meant it went out on Halloween weekend. It was written by Alex Sulkin and directed by Dominic Bianchi. The voice cast for the episode included Caitlin Olsen, known at the time primarily for her role in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, who played Brenda Quagmire, Glenn Quagmire's
Quagmire's sister. The episode introduces Brenda's boyfriend, Jeff, who spends the entire episode physically and verbally abusing her. The episode does not play this for laughs. That is the core of what makes Screams of Silence different from anything else Family Guy had done before it. The show had referenced domestic violence before in the way it referenced most dark subjects, quickly and for comedic effect, as a thing that happens in the world and can therefore be pointed at and used as the basis for a joke. Screams of Silence does something else. It commits to showing Jeff's abuse of Brenda as genuinely disturbing. Jeff hits Brenda. Jeff screams at Brenda. Jeff humiliates Brenda in front of other people. The episode does not undercut these moments with a joke immediately after. The abuse is presented as real, and the show expects the audience to feel something about it other than amusement. The episode begins with a different kind of dark comedy. Peter, Quagmire, and Joe are supposed to go fishing together, but Quagmire does not show up. Peter and Joe go to Quagmire's house to check on him and find him hanging from the ceiling in a state that the show describes as the result of an autoerotic asphyxiation accident. Quagmire is still alive, but has to be taken to the hospital. This opening sequence is played for comedy in the standard Family Guy manner. Quagmire's sexual habits have been a running element of the show for years, and the joke fits within the established pattern of what his character does. While Quagmire is unconscious in the hospital, his sister Brenda arrives with Jeff. This is not the first time Brenda and Jeff have appeared on the show. They had been introduced in a season 8 episode called Jerome is the New Black, in which Brian made a remark about Brenda looking like she enjoyed rough treatment, a joke that in hindsight foreshadowed the direction this character's story would eventually go. When Brenda sings a childhood nursery rhyme to help Quagmire recover in the hospital, the lyrics of the rhyme are about Quagmire dying from autoerotic asphyxiation. Brian hears the song and asks whether this is really something from their childhood. The moment is both funny and genuinely unsettling in the way it establishes Brenda as someone whose entire sense of normal has been shaped by extremely dark circumstances. Quagmire wakes up and sees the full reality of what Jeff is doing to his sister. Jeff controls where Brenda goes, what she says, and how she interacts with other people. When the neighborhood keeps being woken up at night by Jeff screaming at Brenda, Peter, Joe, and Quagmire stage an intervention. They sit Brenda down and try to make her understand that Jeff is dangerous and that she needs to leave him. The intervention scene contains a speech from Quagmire that is played with total seriousness. Quagmire tells Brenda that he loves her, but that he cannot watch her do this to herself. He calls her a cowardly punching bag and says that by staying with Jeff, she is choosing to ruin her own life. He says the words with genuine pain. The scene has no jokes in it. McFarlane, who voices Quagmire, delivers the speech as a real emotional moment between a brother and a sister, not as a setup for a punchline. This is the scene that most critics pointed to as the central problem with the episode. Not because the speech is bad. The speech itself is written and performed with care. The problem is what the speech says. Quagmire tells Brenda that she is choosing her situation. He frames her continued presence in an abusive relationship as a personal failure, a choice she is making out of cowardice. He does not express curiosity about why she stays. He does not acknowledge the well-documented reality that leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous moment for the person being abused, that abusers frequently escalate their violence when a victim attempts to leave, and that the psychological effects of sustained abuse make it genuinely difficult for victims to recognize and act on their own danger. Organizations that work with domestic violence survivors noted all of this in response to the episode. The criticism from these groups was specific rather than general. They were not saying Family Guy should not have touched the subject. They were saying that the way the episode handled the subject communicated false and potentially harmful ideas about why people stay in abusive relationships, and that depicting Brenda's inability to leave as simple cowardice rather than as a complex response to sustained psychological and physical harm was getting the reality of domestic violence wrong in ways that mattered. The episode also drew criticism for the way it depicted Jeff's behavior. Jeff abuses Brenda in public, in front of other people, loudly and obviously. He hits her, he berates her, and he does all of this in situations where multiple witnesses are present. Critics familiar with how domestic abuse actually operates pointed out that this is not typically how abusers behave. Domestic abusers generally work to control their victims in private, presenting a different face to the outside world, which is a large part of why domestic violence is so often invisible to people around the victim. An abuser abuser who hits his girlfriend in front of the entire neighborhood, loudly enough to keep everyone awake at night, is a cartoon version of abuse that makes the real thing less comprehensible rather than more. The resolution of the episode made the criticism more complicated. Quagmire, Peter, and Joe decide that because the police cannot arrest Jeff without Brenda filing a formal complaint, and because Brenda will not file a complaint, the correct solution is to take Jeff on what they describe as a midnight hunting trip and kill him. Quagmire murders Jeff in the woods. Joe, a police officer whose entire professional identity is built around law enforcement, allows this to happen. The episode ends with Jeff dead and Brenda presumably free from the abuse. The TV Tropes analysis of the episode noted a specific unintentional message that came out of this ending. By having Joe acknowledge that the police cannot act without Brenda filing a complaint, the episode accidentally argued that law enforcement's dependence on victim cooperation is itself a failure. Joe sees Jeff abuse Brenda directly and still says his hands are tied until she files a report. Rhode Island law, as actual legal experts noted after the episode aired, includes mandatory arrest provisions for domestic violence situations, meaning that the depiction of Joe's helplessness was also factually wrong about how police in that state are supposed to respond. The AV Club review, written by a critic who had been covering Family Guy for some time, said that the episode veered into territory that did not do Family Guy any favors and was the last show with high moral ground to stand on for dealing with sensitive subjects like domestic abuse. The review pointed out that Family Guy's entire comedic identity was built on taking dark subjects and processing them through absurdist humor. When the show tried to take a dark subject seriously, without the absurdist humor to carry the weight, it exposed the fact that the writing tools the show had developed over 12 seasons were specifically designed for comedy and did not transfer to drama. Taryn R. Moore, writing for a publication called Ology, gave the episode a 7 out of 10, but described it as an episode where someone on the Family Guy writing staff had needed a new way to release pent-up anger, which landed as something other than a compliment. The IMDb page for the episode contains reviews from viewers who identified themselves as survivors of domestic violence and described watching the episode as genuinely distressing, specifically because of the way Brenda's situation was handled. After the episode aired, Brenda was never seen again. The character who had been at the center of the most dramatically serious episode in Family Guy history simply disappeared from the show entirely. The audience never found out what happened to her after Jeff's death. Whether she processed the loss, rebuilt her life, addressed the psychological effects of the abuse she had experienced, or ended up in another dangerous situation was never explored. The show introduced a character specifically to anchor a very special episode about domestic violence, and then dropped that character as soon as the episode was over, which was its own kind of statement about how seriously the show had actually engaged with the subject. The reset button that Family Guy always pressed at the end of each episode was pressed again here, except the reset was incomplete in a specific way. Jeff was permanently dead. Brenda was permanently gone. The murder that Quagmire, Peter, and Joe committed in the woods was simply not referenced in subsequent episodes. A police officer participated in a murder and then went back to his life as a police officer. The show's inability to maintain consequences, which works fine when the consequences are comedic, became genuinely strange when applied to a storyline involving real violence against a real person. What Screams of Silence revealed about Family Guy is a limitation that the show had never been forced to confront quite so directly before. The show was built to be funny about dark things. When it tried to be serious about dark things using the same construction, the result was something that satisfied neither goal. The episode generated real distress in real people who had real experience with domestic violence. That distress was not the intended effect. The intended effect was presumably something closer to what the show had tried to argue through Quagmire's intervention speech, that abuse is serious, that it destroys people, and that it demands a response. The argument got lost in the problems with how the episode understood the thing it was trying to argue about. The episode is a genuine anomaly in Family Guy's catalog. No other episode before or after it committed so fully to being serious about a subject that the show had no real toolkit for handling seriously. The response it generated was a warning that the show's approach to dark comedy had specific limits, and that pushing past those limits produced something that upset audiences in ways that had nothing to do with being edgy or provocative. People were not upset that Family Guy had touched domestic violence. They were upset that the show had touched it badly. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. After Screams of Silence, the next major controversy came from a completely different direction. Not from an episode that tried too hard to be serious, but from an episode that turned something the audience had never expected to feel into something nobody was prepared to lose. The next scandal was about a dog, a car, and over 100,000 people signing a petition to bring a cartoon character back from the dead. Section 9. Brian Griffin's death. 100,000 petitions and a creator's confession. Brian Griffin had been in every episode of Family Guy since the pilot aired in January 1999. 14 years. Over 200 episodes. Every single one of them. Brian was there when the show was new and uncertain. There when it got canceled the first time. There when it came back. There when it got canceled again. There when it came back a second time and became something much larger than it had been in its original run. He was voiced by Seth MacFarlane, the same person who voiced Peter Griffin, Stewie Griffin, and Quagmire. MacFarlane was doing 4 main character voices simultaneously across every episode, and Brian was in some ways the most personal of the 4. Peter was a comic exaggeration. Stewie was a fantasy. Quagmire was a running joke built into human form. Brian was the character who got to say things that felt like they came from a real place. About literature, about ambition, about the gap between who a person thinks they are and who they actually turn out to be. Brian was also, for most of the show's run, Stewie's closest companion. The Road to episodes, which were consistently among the most beloved installments in Family Guy history, were built entirely around the two of them. When Road to Rhode Island established in Season 2 that Brian and Stewie could carry an episode together, the writers built an entire recurring format around that chemistry. Road to Europe, Road to Rupert, Road to Germany, Road to the North Pole, Road to the Multiverse. Each one depended on the specific dynamic between a talking dog who wanted to be taken seriously as an intellectual and a homicidal infant who was genuinely smarter than everyone around him. The format worked because of the relationship, and the relationship worked because of 14 years of consistent characterization. On November 24th, 2013, Season 12, Episode 6 of Family Guy aired on Fox. The episode was titled Life of Brian, written by Alex Carter and directed by Joseph Lee. The episode opened with Brian and Stewie traveling back in time to Jamestown in the 1600s. In a previous adventure, Stewie had given guns to Native Americans, which had changed the course of American history. The opening act resolves that problem and ends with Stewie deciding to destroy his time machine entirely because the risks of time travel had become too great. He smashes it. The parts are gone. There is no way to rebuild it quickly enough to matter. This detail is not accidental. The destruction of the time machine is load-bearing information. The audience does not know that yet. The episode moves on. Brian and Stewie find a street hockey net in a junkyard and bring it home. They set it up in the street outside the Griffin house. They are playing with it when a car comes around the corner, moving too fast. Brian is in the street. The car hits him. The impact is not played as a joke. Brian is thrown by the force of the car and lands on the pavement. He is badly hurt. The Griffins rush him to the veterinarian. The vet examines him and comes back with the news that Brian's injuries are too severe. There is nothing that can be done. Brian is going to die. The family gathers around him. They say goodbye. Brian tells them he loves them. He dies on the table. The scene does not cut away to a joke. There is no punchline. The Griffins cry. Stewie, who built his entire identity around a relationship with Brian that had lasted since Stewie was born, stands in the room having already destroyed the only thing that could have gone back and prevented this from happening. The time machine is gone. Brian is gone. The episode moves forward. The Griffins, still grieving, decide that the house needs a dog. They go to a shelter and come home with a new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, who was best known at the time for playing Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos. Vinny is loud, affectionate, Italian in his mannerisms and speech, and completely different from Brian in almost every measurable way. The episode ends with Stewie lying in bed, unable to sleep, still heartbroken, and Vinny coming into the room and sitting with him. Vinny talks about losing his previous owner and tells Stewie that he understands what it feels like. Stewie accepts him. The episode was over. Brian Griffin was dead. Vinny was the new dog. What happened next happened fast. Within hours of the episode finishing its East Coast broadcast, a petition appeared on the website change.org. The petition was titled Seth MacFarlane and Fox Broadcasting Company, Bring Brian Griffin Back to Family Guy. It was created by a viewer named Aaron Thompson. The petition read that Brian Griffin had been an important part of the viewing experience, that he had added a witty and sophisticated element to the show, and that Family Guy and Fox would lose viewers if Brian was not brought back. Within the first few hours, the petition had gained thousands of signatures. By the following morning, it had gained tens of thousands. Within the first 72 hours, over 100,000 people had signed it. it, making it one of the fastest-growing entertainment-related petitions the Change.org platform had ever seen. The hashtag #BringBackBrian reached the top of Twitter's trending list. Facebook pages were created to mourn Brian and demand his return. One Facebook page called RIP Brian from Family Guy accumulated over 758,000 likes within days of the episode airing. Viewers who had never signed an online petition about a television show before found themselves typing their names onto a list demanding the resurrection of a cartoon dog. The reaction was not ironic or detached. People were genuinely upset, not in the way that audiences get upset when a show makes a bad creative choice, but in the way that people get upset when they lose something they had not realized they were emotionally attached to until it was gone. Some viewers got tattoos, not temporary ones, permanent memorial tattoos that said R.I.P. Brian on their skin, inked during the weeks that the character was dead, in full belief that the death was going to stick. A website appeared at a domain called briansannouncement.com with a countdown clock set to go off 10 days after the episode aired. The implied suggestion was that Brian would be making some kind of announcement when the countdown reached 0, leading fans to speculate that a return was being teased by the show. Fox released a statement clarifying that the countdown website was a hoax and had no connection to the show, the studio, or the network. The countdown was created by someone outside the production entirely, taking advantage of the emotional state of the fan base to generate attention for themselves. MacFarlane posted on Twitter the night the episode aired. His tweet thanked fans for caring so much about the character and said Brian was overcome with gratitude. The tweet was ambiguous enough that it could be read as MacFarlane acknowledging the fan reaction without confirming or denying what would happen next. The show did not wait long to answer the question. 2 episodes after Life of Brian, on December 15th, 2013, Family Guy aired its Christmas episode for that season. The episode was titled Christmas Guy. In it, Stewie encounters a version of himself from a different point in time, who still has a working time pad, the device that allows travel through time. Stewie takes the pad, goes back to the moment just before Brian was hit by the car, and pushes Brian out of the street in time. The car passes. Brian is fine. Stewie destroys the time pad to prevent any further time travel, and the two of them walk back to the house together. Brian is alive. Vinny is gone from the timeline. The show returns to its pre-Life of Brian state, as though nothing had happened. MacFarlane posted on Twitter after Christmas Guy aired. His message was that he had asked whether people really thought he would kill off Brian, and said that doing so would require being in a seriously altered mental state. He also posted a separate message saying that the lesson of the whole story was never to take the people you love for granted, because they can be gone in a moment. In January 2014, MacFarlane spoke to reporters after a press event for a documentary series he was involved with. He addressed the fan reaction directly. He said it surprised all of them. He said the entire team had been very surprised, and that the surprise was a good one, because it showed that people still cared enough about that character to be that angry. He said the expectation had been that the death would create a small stir, but that the level of rage from fans was something nobody had counted on. MacFarlane also gave a more analytical answer about why the stunt had been done in the first place. He said it did what it was designed to do, which was to remind people that Family Guy was still a show where anything could happen, despite the fact that it had been on the air for a long time. The implication was that a show in its 12th season, with over 200 episodes behind it, runs the risk of feeling predictable. Killing Brian, even temporarily, was a way of demonstrating that the show retained the ability to genuinely surprise its audience. Executive producer Steve Callahan had spoken to the entertainment publication E! Online shortly after the Life of Brian episode aired, before Brian had been brought back. Callahan explained that the idea to kill off a main character had been pitched in the writer's room and had caught fire quickly. He said it seemed like a fun way to shake things up. When asked why Brian had been chosen rather than one of the other characters, Callahan said it seemed more believable that a dog would get hit by a car than that one of the human characters would die. He said the choice was made partly because a dog's death felt like it existed more naturally within the realm of possible real-world events than some of the more extreme things that could happen to the human members of the Griffin family. Callahan made these comments while the show was still presenting Brian's death as permanent. At the point of the interview, Vinny was the Griffin family dog, and the official position of the production was that the change was real. Whether Callahan knew at the time of the interview that Brian was coming back 2 episodes later is not something that has been publicly confirmed. The interview reads as a genuine explanation of the creative decision, but it was given in a window where the show had a professional interest in making the death appear permanent. The Screen Rant website ranked Life of Brian among the 12 worst Family Guy episodes ever made. The ranking cited the abruptness of Brian's death and the speed with which the show moved on to Vinny as the primary problems.
times. The review noted that having a new dog casually integrated into the family's life in the same episode where the previous dog died made it feel like the show was treating Brian's loss as less significant than the audience experienced it. The website Popdose described Brian's death as something that seemed shocking, but was actually the easy way out, arguing that the show had generated emotional weight through a cheap trick rather than through genuine storytelling. The reactions that came through IMDb and fan communities were more mixed than the initial Change.org petition suggested. Some viewers who had been critical of Brian's character in the later seasons of the show felt that the death, while abrupt, had been handled with a level of sincerity that Family Guy rarely attempted. Several reviews noted that the family's grief had been portrayed without jokes, that the show had allowed the characters to simply be sad, and that this was more emotionally honest than the constant ironic distance the show usually maintained around serious events. What the Brian death story exposes about Family Guy's relationship with its audience is something that the show's writers may not have fully understood before November 24th, 2013. The show had been running on the assumption that its audience watched it at the same ironic distance that the show maintained from its own content. Family Guy jokes about death, injury, grief, and loss constantly. The show treats nothing as sacred. The audience, the logic went, had been trained by 14 seasons to understand that nothing on Family Guy is meant to be taken seriously. Brian's death revealed that this assumption was wrong, or at least incomplete. The audience had been watching with ironic distance applied to everything except the characters they had spent 14 years with. They could laugh at a random cutaway joke about death because the person dying was fictional and disconnected. They could not apply that same distance to Brian because Brian was not a random cutaway. Brian was someone they had been watching every week since 1999. The emotional investment had accumulated silently over 14 years, and the show's writers had not accounted for how deep it ran. The tattoos are the clearest evidence of this. People got permanent ink on their bodies during the 3 weeks Brian was dead. These were not people who had been waiting for an opportunity to get a Family Guy tattoo. These were people who experienced the death of a fictional dog as a real enough loss that they wanted to mark it permanently on their skin. By the time Christmas Guy brought Brian back and McFarlane was making jokes on Twitter about the whole thing, those tattoos were already there. The people who got them had made a permanent decision based on what turned out to be a 3-week publicity exercise. McFarlane's admission that the reaction surprised everyone involved has a specific quality to it. He said it surprised them in a good way. He framed the fan rage as a positive indicator that the show's audience still cared. That framing is accurate as far as it goes. A show with a completely disengaged audience would not generate 100,000 petition signatures and a trending hashtag within 24 hours of an episode airing. The rage was evidence of connection. But the other side of that framing is that the show used the evidence of that connection to generate a publicity cycle, brought the character back before the connection could actually be tested over a longer period, and then moved on. Vinny, who had been introduced as a legitimate new character and who some fans had begun to genuinely enjoy in the brief time he was part of the show, was erased from the timeline as if he had never existed. Tony Sirico's performance as a warm-hearted Italian dog who bonded with a grieving Stewie was simply deleted. The show got the attention from Brian's death and then restored the status quo before any of the consequences of the change could settle into something permanent. The whole sequence, from the death in November to the resurrection in December, lasted exactly 3 weeks. In that time, Family Guy generated more press coverage, more social media activity, and more demonstrable proof of audience investment than it had produced in years. McFarlane acknowledged that the ratings responded positively to the event. The show had accomplished what it set out to accomplish. The people with the tattoos were left to figure out what to do with them. The Brian death story has one more layer that most people skip over. McFarlane was the voice of Brian. He was also the voice of Peter, Stewie, and Quagmire. When the writers' room pitched killing Brian, they were pitching the permanent removal of one of 4 characters that the same person voiced every single week. McFarlane sat in that writers' room, heard the pitch, and said yes. He agreed to kill a character he had been voicing since 1999. He agreed to make himself perform the death scene. He voiced Brian, saying goodbye to the family. He voiced Stewie's grief immediately after. The person who killed Brian Griffin was the same person who had been keeping him alive for 14 years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Brian death story is the last of Family Guy's mysteries and scandals that is about a single, dramatic, creative choice and its immediate consequences. The final case on this list is different in character from everything before it. It is not about one episode or one decision or one moment. It is about a 25-year war between Family Guy
Guy and a watchdog organization that filed formal legal complaints, pressured advertisers, campaigned for cancellation, and lost every single round, and yet managed to outlast almost every other critic the show ever had. Section 10. The Parents Television Council's 25-year war against the show. Most organizations that set out to destroy something either succeed or give up. The Parents Television Council did neither. They spent 25 years trying to get Family Guy canceled, restricted, defunded by advertisers, blocked by the FCC, and removed from early evening television schedules. They filed formal legal complaints. They organized letter-writing campaigns. They pressured corporations to pull their advertising money. They published weekly reports naming Family Guy the worst show on television so many times that the designation lost most of its ability to shock anyone. They put the show on annual lists of the most dangerous programming available to American families. They called it filth. They called it indecent. They called it a threat to children. Family Guy is currently in its 22nd season and has produced over 400 episodes. The Parents Television Council, commonly known as the PTC, is a nonprofit organization based in the United States. Their stated mission is to protect children from what they describe as harmful content on television and in other media. They were founded in 1995 by L. Brent Bozell III, a conservative media critic who had spent years writing columns and giving speeches about what he saw as the moral decline of American entertainment. The organization grew through the late 1990s by identifying specific shows and specific moments in those shows that they believed crossed lines of decency, and then organizing their membership to file complaints with the Federal Communications Commission and with the companies that advertised during those shows. The FCC is the government body in the United States that has the legal authority to fine television networks for broadcasting content that violates federal indecency standards. Indecency standards in American broadcast law are specific and relatively narrow. They cover explicit sexual content, certain categories of language, and graphic depictions of certain kinds of violence when broadcast during hours when children are likely to be watching. The PTC's strategy was built around using the FCC complaint process as a tool, generating enough formal complaints about specific episodes that the FCC would be forced to investigate and potentially fine Fox for airing Family Guy. The PTC had been watching Family Guy with hostility from before it ever aired. The organization had publicly speculated that the show would push the limits of decency before the premiere episode went out in January 1999. They were, in that narrow sense, correct. Family Guy pushed limits from its very first episode. What the PTC did not anticipate was that pushing limits and violating FCC regulations are two different things, and that the FCC's legal definition of indecency was harder to meet than the PTC's definition of objectionable content. The first formal FCC complaint the PTC filed against Family Guy came in January 2005, following a rebroadcast of an episode called And the Wiener Is. The episode contains humor centered on Peter Griffin and a competition involving physical size. The PTC filed the complaint arguing the content was indecent under federal law. The FCC reviewed the complaint and denied it. The FCC's written response stated that the episode lacked explicit or graphic descriptions or depictions of any sexual organ, and also lacked what the agency described as a shocking, pandering, or titillating effect. The complaint was rejected on the grounds that the content, while potentially offensive to some viewers, did not meet the legal threshold for indecency in broadcast media. This pattern repeated itself across multiple complaints over multiple years. The PTC would file, the FCC would review, the complaint would be denied or receive no formal action. The cycle continued without producing the financial penalties or broadcast restrictions the PTC was seeking. In May 2000, the organization launched a letter-writing campaign directed at Fox, asking the network to cancel Family Guy. This was during season 2, when the show was already struggling in the ratings and had been moved around the schedule multiple times. The PTC pointed to what they called strong advertiser resistance and low ratings as evidence that the show was failing on multiple fronts and deserved to be removed from the lineup. Fox canceled the show that same May, though the evidence that the PTC's letter campaign had any meaningful role in that decision is not clear. The ratings and the scheduling problems were sufficient explanation on their own. When Family Guy came back in 2005, the PTC continued its campaign as though it had never paused. The organization named the show to its worst primetime shows for family viewing lists in 2000, 2005, and 2006. In the 2006 to 2007 television season, the PTC named Family Guy the single worst show of the entire season. This was the revival era, when the show was at the peak of its
renewed popularity, drawing large audiences and generating significant cultural conversation. The PTC's designation as worst show of the season was therefore not a description of a failing program, but a declaration of ongoing hostility toward a show that was succeeding by every measure the television industry used. The PTC's complaints to Fox's advertisers were a separate track of their campaign. The organization approached companies, including the Wrigley Company, which makes chewing gum, and Burger King, and asked them to stop advertising during Family Guy. The argument was that both companies sold products that appealed to children and teenagers, and that advertising those products during a show the PTC considered harmful to young viewers was irresponsible. The PTC pointed out that because Family Guy was an animated show, younger viewers might be attracted to it despite its adult content rating, creating a situation where children could be exposed to material the PTC found damaging. The advertiser pressure campaign had more success than the FCC complaint route, in the sense that some advertisers did at various points reduce or adjust their advertising presence during the show.
Generating advertiser concern was genuinely one of the more powerful tools available to an organization like the PTC, because television networks depend on advertising revenue, and advertisers are sensitive to being associated with controversy. However, the success of the advertiser campaign was also limited. Family Guy continued to attract advertising revenue throughout its run. The show remained on the air. The advertisers who pulled back were replaced by others. In November 2005, the PTC organized a specific campaign around an episode called PTV. The episode was itself a satire of the FCC and the entire broadcast decency system. In PTV, the FCC begins censoring real life, not just television, placing bleeping sounds and black bars over everyday activities that the organization considers offensive. The episode was directly mocking the regulatory environment that the PTC had been trying to use as a weapon against the show. The PTC launched a campaign asking its members to file indecency complaints about PTV with the FCC. The PTC then acknowledged publicly that they were uncertain whether they would file a formal complaint themselves, and records indicated that no complaints had been logged through the PTC's own website from that campaign. The episode that the PTC was campaigning against for being indecent was later highlighted in a Fox special called TV's Funniest Moments that broadcast on June 1st, 2007. When a rerun of that special aired on August 20th of the same year, the PTC named it their Worst of the Week, noting that PTV had been among the highlights featured. The show that the PTC had tried to file FCC complaints about was being celebrated by the same network the PTC had been pressuring for years, and the PTC's response was to designate the celebration itself as another item on their list of objectionable content. The specific FCC complaints the PTC filed across the years covered a wide range of episodes and content types. In March 2009, the organization filed a complaint about an episode called Family Gay, which dealt with sexual content involving a gay relationship. The complaint cited violations of broadcast indecency law. In December 2009, just 2 days after it aired, the PTC filed a complaint about an episode called Business Guy, pointing to a scene involving a lap dance as a possible violation of federal law. In 2010, the PTC filed a complaint about the show's 150th episode, Brian and Stewie, objecting to content involving bodily functions. PTC President Tim Winter was quoted at the time saying that Seth MacFarlane appeared to have carefully reviewed the legal definition of broadcast indecency and set out to violate it as literally as possible. In November 2013, 5 days after it aired, the PTC filed an indecency enforcement request about an episode called A Fistful of Meg. The organization cited what it described as lewd sexual content and jokes about child abuse, exploitation, rape, and the sexualized use of food, as well as the episode's main plot involving a male student physically attacking a female classmate. In February 2015, the PTC filed a complaint about an episode called Quagmire's Mom, which dealt with Quagmire having a sexual encounter with an underage teenage girl without knowing her age until after the fact. The complaint cited sexually explicit dialogue and jokes about statutory rape as violations of broadcast standards. None of these complaints resulted in fines or formal enforcement actions against Fox or against Family Guy. The FCC's repeated failure to act on the PTC's complaints was not a sign that the FCC disagreed with the PTC's description of the content. In several cases, the FCC's written responses acknowledged that the content might be offensive to many viewers. The issue was the legal standard. For the FCC to fine a broadcaster for indecency, the content must meet a specific legal definition that accounts for community standards and requires the content to be patently offensive in a way that goes beyond simply being crude or uncomfortable. Family Guy consistently operated in territory that was offensive and uncomfortable without crossing the line the law had drawn. The PTC also criticized Fox directly for what they saw as failures in the content rating system. Television programs in the United States are assigned ratings that are supposed to give parents information about what kind of content a show contains. The rating system uses letter codes and descriptors like S for sexual content and V for violence. The PTC argued that Fox had failed to include the appropriate descriptors in Family Guy's ratings for certain episodes, meaning parents who checked the rating before allowing their children to watch were not getting accurate information about what the episode contained. The PTC pushed for stricter and more accurate application of the rating system to Family Guy episodes specifically. The organization also objected consistently to the time at which Family Guy aired. The show ran in what Fox called the animation domination block on Sunday evenings, typically starting at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The PTC argued that 9 p.m. was still early enough in the evening that children were likely to be watching television, and that placing Family Guy in that slot, rather than later in the night when younger viewers would be less likely to be awake, was a deliberate choice by Fox to maximize the show's audience at the expense of protecting young people from content the PTC considered harmful. Fox did not move the show. Throughout this entire 25-year campaign, the PTC maintained a weekly publication called the Worst TV Show of the Week. Family Guy was named to this designation at least 40 times across the show's run. 40 separate weekly reports identifying Family Guy as the single worst thing currently airing on American broadcast television. The PTC also named a live-action special hosted by MacFarlane and voice actress Alex Borstein called Family Guy Presents Seth and Alex's Almost Live Comedy Show as a worst TV show of the week, citing what it described as disgusting sex jokes, crude Holocaust humor, cruel imitations of deaf people, and large amounts of bleeped profanity. The criticism about Holocaust humor connected to a broader pattern in the PTC's objections to the show, which was the show's treatment of religion generally. The PTC published a report in 2006 called Faith in a Box, which examined how religion was portrayed across prime-time entertainment television during the 2005 to 2006 season. The report concluded that mockery of God was a constant feature of Family Guy. The PTC cited specific episodes, including one called The Courtship of Stewie's Father, which contains a cutaway depicting God behaving in a manner the PTC found sacrilegious. The 1999 episode Holy Crap, which depicted Peter's relationship with his devout Catholic father and made jokes at the expense of Catholic religious practice, had already drawn criticism from L. Brent Bozell III, who wrote a column calling the episode a promotion of anti-Catholic sentiment. The PTC's religious objections to Family Guy were not limited to Christianity. The organization criticized the show for its treatment of multiple faiths across its run, though the Catholic and broader Christian content drew the most consistent attention, given the PTC's own religious orientation and membership base. The relationship between the PTC and Seth MacFarlane had an unexpected development in 2015. The PTC's president, Tim Winter, who had spent years publicly criticizing MacFarlane in the show, became personally friendly with MacFarlane following a complaint about a 2015 episode. The nature of this friendship, and how it developed from a formal complaint into a personal relationship, has not been detailed extensively in public reporting, but the fact that it happened at all is one of the stranger footnotes in the entire 25-year conflict. The man whose organization had called MacFarlane's show the worst on television dozens of times and filed repeated legal complaints against it ended up on friendly, personal terms with its creator. The PTC's campaign against Family Guy was the longest sustained effort by any outside organization to harm a single television show in the history of American broadcast media. The effort involved formal government complaints, advertiser pressure campaigns, weekly public designations of the show as harmful content, annual lists, published reports, media appearances, and a consistent public presence across 2.5 decades. The effort failed to cancel the show, failed to generate FCC fines, failed to permanently drive away major advertisers, and failed to move the show to a later time slot. What the PTC's campaign did accomplish, in a sideways and probably unintended manner, was to generate continuous publicity for Family Guy across its entire run. Every time the PTC named the show their worst of the week, they were telling their membership and anyone who read their publications that this show existed and was doing things that crossed lines. For the audience that Family Guy was actually made for, that description was closer to a recommendation than a warning. A show that a conservative watchdog organization had named the worst program on television over 40 times and still could not get canceled carried a specific kind of credibility with exactly the viewers who would find that fact entertaining. The The show outlasted the cultural moment it was born into. Family Guy premiered in 1999 and is still running. The PTC, which began its campaign before the premiere episode aired, is still operating. The war between them never formally ended and never produced a decisive result. The show kept making the content the PTC objected to. The PTC kept objecting. The FCC kept declining to act. Fox kept airing the show. The audience kept watching. In 2015, the PTC's president became friends with the creator of the show the PTC had been trying to destroy for 16 years. That detail does not resolve the conflict or explain it cleanly. It just sits there as a fact, as strange and specific as most of the other facts in Family Guy's history, in a story that has been full of strange and specific facts from the very beginning. The show that almost ended in May 2000 when Fox pulled the plug the first time, that almost ended forever on the morning of September 11th, 2001, when its creator was standing at a check-in counter being told he was too late, that came back from 2 cancellations on the strength of DVD sales and late-night reruns, that made a bin Laden joke 14 months before the September 11 attacks and had to erase it from the record, that banned its own episodes, that generated a conspiracy theory, that fought a former governor and lost the public argument to the actress who had done the voice, that killed its most beloved character and brought him back 3 weeks later, that spent 25 years being called the worst show on television by an organization that could not stop it. That show is still on the air. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.